The period was very difficult and really very dangerous.
What we were afraid of was that some of those tens of thousands of nuclear weapons would go AWOL. We were worried about terrorists.
The fate of a lot of people, maybe even the world, depended on taking appropriate action.
At the end of the Cold War, there were few in the United States Senate who understood the dangers of nuclear weapons in the former Soviet Union. This is a story about one man who did understand and took action.
It was 1998 when he visited the Russian nuclear lab. He arrived together with two other senators, but the name of Pete Domenici I know, of course, very well.
This is about a baseball player, a teacher, and a lawyer. About a father and a patriot. This is about leadership. And the story begins in a coffee shop in downtown Albuquerque in 1966.
I was 34 years old, and I worked in the old First National Bank building downtown Albuquerque, practicing law. And I used to go to coffee every morning with 4 or 5 friends. And this day was special to them because they said, Pete, we got something for you. You either run for public office or quit complaining. Now, they didn't say that. They said, quit bitching. They said, run for city commission at large.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Albuquerque was growing, and Domenici was elected to the city council, and then, by his peers, elected as chairman, which was essentially mayor.
When Pete came in, Pete did what these others had not been able to do, which was bring a coalition of leadership together. He was effective at gaining the trust of people because he followed through and listened to them and understood the need to talk with people.
This would become a theme of Domenici's leadership: listening and following through on what he promised. From baseball player to mayor, the leader emerged.
Then along came an open seat to run for the U.S. Senate against Jack Daniels.
Just 6 years and 4 months removed from the coffee shop conversation to run for city council, the son of Italian immigrants, Pete Domenici, became a senator.
I walked into the United States Senate as the first Republican senator from New Mexico in 38 years. Now, interesting, I had no role models. I didn't love Hubert Humphrey. I wasn't enthralled with Robert Taft.
And in addition to the job, there was a large family to consider.
We were too poor to have this job because we didn't have the money to come home. It cost more than 1 month's pay for the round-trip tickets for 10 people. So we didn't do that too much.
In New Mexico, sometimes we went back when he was campaigning. I remember getting an apartment for like maybe 6 weeks, and we just all moved back there, kit and caboodle, so we could all be back there.
Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here. This is Houston City.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
In Congress, the committees you join define you. Early on, Senator Domenici made a critical decision that would affect his career and the country's future.
I made an early election with the help of staff and others to gamble with staying on the Budget Committee because I was apt to become ranking member quicker there than any other committee.
Governing requires budgeting, and budgeting is governing. The whole fundamental premise of how government works centers around what we tax, what we take in revenues, and what we spend.
Surprisingly, it wasn't until 1972, the year Pete Domenici was first elected, that Congress established the Joint Committee on Budget Control. And finally, in 1974, permanent House and Senate committees on the budget.
The newest committee in the United States Senate was the Budget Committee. And nobody really knew what it was going to do, if it had any power.
I was the director of the Congressional Budget Office, and I very clearly remember the first hearing that he was present at because the previous witness had mispronounced his name, called him Senator Domenici, and I didn't. And the first thing he said to me when he got a chance to ask a question was, "I like you, you can pronounce my name."
The move to stay on the Budget Committee was, if not shrewd, extremely fortunate. Just 6 years later, as Ronald Reagan entered the White House, Domenici got the news.
Lo and behold, here comes an election night telephone call from Howard Baker, and instead of calling me Senator, he said, "Hi, Mr. Chairman." And I said, "What are you talking about, Baker?" And he said, "Well, that's going to be your name from this point on, because it looks like we're going to take over the Senate, and there's nobody entitled to be chairman ahead of you. You stayed on there when others fled, and so you're chairman."
Pete became one of the really great senators, one of those that I depended on for advice, and he gave it freely. He was not hesitant.
Being the chairman of the Budget Committee was, a two-edged sword. I mean, you were in the middle of everything, but you had to ultimately put together a budget plan, and nobody was ever happy. They say that like a good compromise is one when everybody walks away feeling like they gave up too much. And Pete Domenici was the master of actually getting it done.
Pete spoke freely. He spoke enthusiastically. He expressed his views, but then he supported the decision. And that is the essence of an effective leadership.
I think the fact that we had an imperfect law called the Budget Act, Budget Impoundment Act, we knew what problems had to be solved, but we didn't have a piece of legislation that governed our activities that provided for a way to do it.
Until 1980, basically the Budget Act was an accounting tool. You added it up, you subtracted it. It really had no teeth to it.
And they didn't try to do much.
And then when you took over and you and Steve Bell figured it out that there was a way through this process called reconciliation.
Right.
You are the father and the founder of what really is still being used to this day. Reconciliation as a tool.
It obviated Rule 22, which is the filibuster rule. What it said is this: you cannot speak forever. You have a time limitation automatically in the law, and you have to pass it at a certain date, and it does not need to be filibuster proof. It just needs a majority of members showing up. So if 78 guys show up and you can win it 40-38, you win. I remember Howard Baker held a meeting down in his house of all the new chairmen. And there were some good chairmen, John Tower, Bob Dole, Packwood, Danforth, and said, "Boys, this is how we're going to do it. And Pete's going to tell you how we're going to do it." And Domenici stood up and told him about reconciliation.
I'm a lawyer by training, and I think a lot of people, if they read the Budget Act, if they're being kind, will say that it's open to numerous interpretations. It is not the paragon of clarity. And so, because so few people understood the Budget Act, and Pete Domenici was viewed as the expert on the Budget Act, it came to be the Budget Act was whatever Pete Domenici said the Budget Act was.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
President Reagan and we didn't get along too well a couple of times because he wanted such big defense numbers and wanted us to do things his way, and we had to do it our way. The Senate was different than the President. There were two different things. And we had to remind him of that every now and then.
There came a time where we just simply didn't have the votes in the Budget Committee to sustain the Reagan request for more defense money.
Domenici had postponed the markup hearing once already, at the President's request.
At the end of 2 weeks, we had no agreement. So Domenici announced that on a Friday that next Tuesday we would begin markup again of the new fiscal year budget. Nobody believed him that he would do that, because he didn't think he had the guts to stand up to Reagan. And so Tuesday morning, we started markup, which is always in public, and by this time you must have had 40 television cameras there because see if Domenici's going to do it, huh?
And the phone rang in the cloakroom, and the clerk came out and said, "Bill, somebody on the phone wants to talk to you." I go back, and it was the President of the United States, and he said he wanted to talk to the chairman.
So I had to get out and go around, and of course the televisions followed me over there. Here I am on the telephone inside a little cabinet and talking to President Reagan, and he's very upset. President Reagan says, "I want you to call the meeting off." I said, "The meeting we're in? Yes, I can't do that, Mr. President. These are all senators. They're all waiting. There's 18 of them, and we've been working on this for quite a while. We're taking up defense this afternoon, and Cap has had a chance to make a deal with us to get an agreement, and he won't talk." He said, "I'm asking you again." I said, "I know, but you're president, and we're a Senate committee, and we have a job, you have a job, and it'll all come out right. Defense is going to get taken care of. We just can't destroy this whole process for this." He repeated it again, then hung up the phone.
Reagan was so mad he threw the telephone across the Oval Office, Stockman told me later. But Domenici, everybody looked at Domenici and said, "Ooh, okay, this is the real deal." So over a space of about 12 years, between 1974 and 1986, Domenici had emerged from, let's be honest, obscurity. A tiny state. A guy who'd never been to Washington before. A person who had never chaired a committee or a subcommittee. And all of a sudden, he's doing all these extraordinary things, including saying to the President of the United States, you know, I have to do my job, and thank you.
Social Security was really on the brink of disaster, more than the brink of disaster. They were trying to get a budget deal, and I mean, Dave Stockman and Secretary of the Treasury, I think it was Don Regan at the time, I mean, they were in the office constantly, or Domenici was down at the White House. I mean, it was one of the big budget battles.
We'd had the Social Security agreement in 1983. The numbers still stunk. So Domenici was able to get in the budget resolution 1/2 of a COLA. What does that mean? COLA stands for cost of living adjustment. And what Domenici said was, instead of giving the full 5% increase over the next couple of years, let's make it 2.5% increase. Still be an increase, but it would only be half of the cost of living adjustment. There were all sorts of economic reasons why that was a good idea. So the majority leader at the time was Bob Dole.
Our budget would have saved $185 billion over 3 years, and most of it was done by Pete Domenici. And we were short one vote, and we knew Pete Wilson was in the hospital.
Pete Wilson had had an emergency appendectomy earlier that day. Now, that was in the days when they really cut you open. You know, it wasn't any of this little, laparoscopic stuff. He was under a white sheet, had the tubes in his arms and all the intravenous stuff. And we had to pass a special rule on the spot to allow Senator Wilson, in his particular garb, onto the floor of the United States Senate.
When he came in, everybody stood and clapped, and so it was hadn't happened before. I don't think it's happened since.
Put up his hand, said aye, and wheeled him out, and we won by one vote. And of course, we thought we were going to have a very formidable budget that would make the first significant change in entitlement programs.
So that was a major success. Senator Dole, Senator Domenici had worked on that plan. And then it goes to the House. And the president was getting a lot of pressure about this, what's this thing about freezing Social Security? And as a consequence, he and Speaker O'Neill, it's always referred to as the Oak Tree Agreement, they go out into the Rose Garden behind an oak tree, and supposedly the deal is cut that the president would not support the Domenici-Dole proposal.
They cut the legs out from under us. I mean, that was a noble effort by Pete Domenici. We got shot down by our own people.
And as a consequence, that particular proposal fell apart. It did not pass in the House. And by the way, I think it was a period of time that led to a very depressed United States Senator Pete Domenici.
So we were left pretty much out in the cold. It was an effort to get things started in ways that are still haunting us because we haven't taken care of them.
If you look back now and see where we are today, had we followed some of Pete Domenici's efforts way back in 1985, we might be out of this mess.
One of the big initiatives that the senator was engaged in while I was on staff was what we called weird science. It was the semiconductor industry, mapping the human genome, and superconductivity. When Pete Domenici started working on this issue, nobody knew what a genome was. And this was typical of how he would approach a project, in that he would get some of the smartest people and experts in the country into a room and talk about issues.
That hearing in Albuquerque in 1986 really set the path for Domenici's involvement in getting the laboratories to see what can be done to get the ideas, the technologies out of the laboratory into the hands of American industry. That's the way that he viewed it. Out of that arose eventually what was called the National Competitiveness for Technology Transfer Act. And that's one where Domenici played a major role. The way that Domenici worked, he made sure that he held hearings on the subject. He made sure that he went out to industry to ask people what was actually going on in industry. Does it make sense for the labs to couple with industry? But by far the biggest one that we started, and this is really vintage Domenici, is we started the Human Genome Project.
Pete's always been a big thinker. When you think about the Human Genome Project, that seemed like a small idea when he forced it into the budget in the 1980s, but that revolutionized medicine and science for the world.
I remember it was on a Saturday morning. He pulled in people from other universities, some of his friends from the medical industries, the laboratory people. We discussed this issue of the Human Genome Project, and he said, let's go.
Unfortunately, the National Institutes of Health were not interested in doing the mapping, but Domenici was.
He's like a bulldog, you know, once he decides, he doesn't let go.
So lo and behold, I wrote up a bill and went to a Democrat who was my great friend. They were in control then. His name is Lawton Childs, state of Florida. And I said to him, he was the appropriator for National Institutes of Health. I went to him and said, Lawton, will you join me? This is a great venture. If you don't do it, I'm going to do it, but I think you should. We ought to, even without the president, we ought to initiate and start the funding of the mapping of the human genome. He said, I'm with you. They didn't want to do it, we made them do it.
So Domenici figured out how we could actually do this as a partnership between the Department of Energy and its laboratories and the National Institutes of Health. By, let's say, about 10 years, a little more than 10 years later, we not only mapped the human genomes, we sequenced it.
What really made him magical and built that Midas touch he had with individuals, with families. You could walk into a room guaranteed that someone in that room's life had been impacted by one small thing he had done for their family, for their grandfather, their grandmother. Someone in that room had been helped by him at a very individual level.
He went off to college still. He was a great athlete in high school, and he carried a 3.8 in college. And then the last year of college, he really became ill. He became very reclusive and didn't want to see his friends, stayed by himself. His grades started suffering then. It's just really hard to take because at that time there was really not a good treatment for schizophrenia.
Senator Domenici became aware that almost all group health insurance coverage did not extend to mental illnesses or conditions. Certainly not to the same extent that it extended to physical illnesses and conditions. He became aware of that from personal experience.
Everybody, absolutely everyone, has gone through the experience of dealing in a very intimate way with people who struggle. And so Pete understood that. He brought that experience to the debate.
We had insurance, of course, on him, and it topped out, I think, at $20,000. So, of course, they wouldn't renew it, and they wouldn't pay for any more. This new medication, gosh, was almost $1,500 a month, not including blood tests.
But Senator Domenici felt we were behind the times, that physical and mental illnesses were not that different, that they were disorders that could be diagnosed and could be treated effectively, the same as physical illnesses.
This is a physical disability, even if there's chemicals and neurotransmitters involved, just like it would be if you had a stroke or many other things that happen to the brain. So that medical coverage was needed.
He made it clear that it is a disease like any other disease, like cancer, whatever, it is up there with them, and it should be treated that way.
So he developed legislation to require insurance companies to treat mental illness conditions or to deal with them and consider them the same as they treated physical conditions, and to extend the coverage to those conditions as well.
He and Paul Wellstone, Ted Kennedy was involved in this issue for a long time, and they spent a lot more time on the issue than I did. But ironically, I ended up with Teddy Kennedy getting terribly sick and not being around, and Paul Wellstone, of course, killed in a tragic accident. And the Democrats in the majority, that I managed the bill on the floor of the United States Senate.
This didn't make insurance companies happy, nor did it make big employers happy. It did not make their lobbying arms in Washington happy.
I believe what Pete Domenici did for the parity of the Insurance Act will help so many people. You know, the financial burden is huge.
Someday when history gets written and then memories of who served and what time, and this will be a subject matter that will be talked about, and the name of Pete Domenici will resonate very, very strongly historically.
He gave other people hope. There is help out there. I mean, my son is doing fabulous now.
Whether it was creating law or just lending support and perhaps some finances, Domenici consistently found ways to give people hope and a future.
What was the history of character counts?
Well, about 12 years ago, I read a little newspaper article and it talked about character counts. So I got on the phone the next day and called the man who started the program.
We make a difference every day of our lives, each time we are honest, kind, or responsible.
When character counts came along, it was not legislative at first. It was supporting character education. Then other senators and congressmen got on board, and eventually character counts week passage was almost assured, and Senator Nunn and Senator Dodd and others always joined with him.
I thought it was a great concept and idea. They would incorporate it in a seamless way in the entire day, week, month, that principle of good character.
There was always a good purpose in things that he did, in legislative efforts that he made, and publicity that he worked on, such as Character Counts with Tom Selleck and Barbara Jordan, the two co-chairs at that time, to really get it recognized, not only in New Mexico, but nationally.
I chose caring because it means to me that you'll help somebody out who's in need and stuff.
That's right. Very good. That's very good.
Okay, ready?
Very nice. Thank you.
When illegal Canadian dumping put Carlsbad's potash industry on the ropes, Senator Domenici stepped up once again and used every tool at his disposal.
The potash industry was flat on its back, and Pete Domenici wanted the trade representative to do something about saving the potash industry. His good friend Jack Danforth was the chairman of the trade subcommittee. And so we worked up a day and a schedule where the senators were going to go to the Senate floor where they have a conversation about potash. Danforth is saying it would be a travesty if we didn't have a vibrant potash industry in the United States. And this goes on for 45 minutes. And as they're walking off the floor, Senator Danforth puts his arm around Pete Domenici and he says, "So Pete, what is potash?" It was important to the nation because Pete Domenici said it was important to the nation, and that was good enough for Jack Danforth.
We filed suit against the Canadians and won a first-class dumping case, and won that case, and it just turned the potash companies around, and this was 1991, and today it's one of our top industries. Potash is an all-time high, 1,200 people employed.
Later in the 90s, I was the budget director in the first Clinton administration. By this time, the Senate was Republican, and Pete Domenici was the chair of the Budget Committee, and we were negotiating back and forth, but the two bills, the 1993 bill, which was launched by the Clinton administration, and which was not bipartisan. The Democrats couldn't pick up any Republican votes for that.
I think that he was able to move things forward and get a budget year after year because he really studied the process. I mean, he knew the programs, he knew how much they cost, and he knew their impact on his constituents back in the state.
And then we had the infamous terrible winter of 1995 and 96, when we had a debt limit, and we had problems, and we ended up with government shutdown.
If you look back at it all, we did bigger things than that, but that was probably the most difficult medicine that we ever imposed on the public, was to say we can't agree, and therefore we won't have a budget for a while, and the government of the United States, for the ordinary things they do on a daily basis, will have no money to operate.
95, 96 was really a tough time for all of us, and so we'll take it to the American public, and we'll have an election in 1996, and
we lost.
And we lost. Clinton won, and then we came back, and almost immediately after the election was over, quietly, without a lot of attention, began to try to see, let's not go through this government shutdown again. And you negotiated throughout January, February, March, and we got to an agreement.
As Clinton once said, Domenici was one of the few senators he trusted. Domenici, as a Republican and leading the Republican side, and the president on his side, achieved what was called the Balanced Budgets Act.
He and I both believe that crafting a workable budget is a key responsibility of the United States government. And his work in building consensus helped us to pass the balanced budget in 1997.
And we had balanced budgets for 4 consecutive fiscal years. First time in almost 40 years that had happened. In fact, that's the first time for 4 consecutive years in half a century.
That was a critical decision point. It was a critical accomplishment because it showed that the American government, the American Congress, and the presidency could work together and make a difficult decision and bring our budget in alignment with our expenditures.
I remember Senator Domenici came back to the office that evening, and Senator Domenici's line was, the budget's going to be balanced next year. Now, I've been working on that for 20 years. What am I going to do next? And that encapsulated who he was. Minutes after accomplishing a 20-year objective, he wanted to know what we were going to do next. And he happened to have 3 of us in the room, Steve Bell, Pete Lyons, and myself, and we talked about nuclear things. But that became the speech, and we went up to the Belfer Center at Harvard, and he gave this speech, and that was it. That was the whole deal.
So his speech at Harvard certainly laid out many challenges relating to the use of nuclear technologies, including nuclear power, but it also covered the non-proliferation aspects of the challenge.
Over the next couple of weeks, he started getting letters about the speech. And I remember one of the letters came in from a Russian academician who had sent it as an academician, but by the time we got the letter, he'd been promoted and was the Minister of Atomic Energy.
From that speech at Harvard, he crafted, I don't know how many bills, I'd have to go back and count, that advanced either nuclear power or non-proliferation.
The timing was perfect. The world was changing. The stakes were high.
During the end of the Cold War and the breakup of the Soviet Union, the nuclear issues were very big.
We were now threatened more by Russia's weakness than we were threatened by Soviet strength. The institutions that guarded those tens of thousands of nuclear weapons and more than 1 million kilograms of fissile materials all of a sudden dissolved. And that is its weakness. That was our threat, not the fact that the missiles were still pointed at us.
There are many different issues, and among them that were the matters of protection of nuclear materials and not spreading.
And some people try to use this time to get some money. using the nuclear material as a valuable stuff for trade.
The Soviets had not controlled their fissile material the way we had. I mean, they controlled it from us, but they didn't have it safeguarded, they didn't have it inventoried, they didn't know how many weapons they had.
February of 1992, about 2 months after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, we came back and we briefed Domenici. We briefed them on the fact that, first of all, these guys are every bit as good as we are. You know, their nuclear arsenal is as good as our nuclear arsenal. They're in dire, dire straits. They used to live a life of privilege, and now they're in poverty. And so we not only worry about the nukes, the fissile materials, but we worry about the scientists.
The situation with salaries was dramatic. It was equal, the salary was equal to zero, so very low. And people suffered a lot. Sometimes salary were not paid during months.
And that was very difficult to get through the minds of most of the people in Congress. Domenici understood that immediately.
He went to Senator Lugar, he went to Senator Nunn, and he made it very clear to them that the three of them together could move the needle on limiting the exposure of these very, very difficult, challenging weapons and letting those get into the wrong hands.
So it's a sensitive area. It's understandable that it's quite difficult to find after we were enemy for 50 years and then just start, be good friends, colleagues.
The two people that came to Santa Fe was the director of their Los Alamos in Sairov. His name is Radi Ilkayev. And his person, also a scientist for international activity, was Vladimir Rogachev. And so in a Santa Fe hotel, we met with Rogachev and Ilkayev with Domenici.
Being near him, I feel him like my friend, even do not know him exactly. But I just see him and see that it is a friend. It's his appearance and his jokes and his way of speaking, answering, and so on. Not so many people of such kind exist.
You understand that we are not scientists.
He went to Russia several times as a part of these negotiations to batten down the hatches on the former Soviet Union counterparts to our nuclear labs and to their massive stockpile of nuclear weapons.
Well, for me it was, from the very beginning, it was just name and nothing else. And this is a U.S. Senator. So big, big piece of cheese.
Senator Domenici, along with the senators who went with him on the trip, were the first senators to enter one of the closed so-called nuclear cities of Russia. We were taken to a weapons museum at Arzamas. There was a mock-up there of the 100 megaton device that had been built at Arzamas, intended for the east coast of the United States. And a picture of Senator Domenici standing beside that weapon has always stayed with me. More than anything else, that to me summarized why he was doing what he was doing. He was talking with the lab director and they were joking and sharing stories about their grandchildren and how their activities would feed in to a world that would be safe for the grandchildren.
So it was a way of developing trust, high-level trust, in this particular case between high-level politics and scientists and scientific leaders from Russia. Extremely, extremely important, because we were in confrontation between countries. a few tens years ago.
The guy who did more to make sure that we put at least some kind of constraints on the proliferation of knowledge and material that can blow the world up was Pete Domenici. And 99% of it was behind the scenes. I mean, we didn't send out a lot of press releases on that for a number of reasons.
First, we made an agreement with our United States colleagues that we should control fissile elements with scientific engineering methods.
The material control, protection, and accountability. These systems were created in Russian institutes and centers with the help of the United States.
The second was, as fast as possible, remove all the nuclear weapons from the territories of Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan to the territory of Russia. And then the third was to prevent scientists from leaving the country. And these problems were not only dangerous for Russia, but also for the United States and all countries of the world. And collaboration with the United States, and particularly with Senator Domenici, helped us to solve the problems.
What Domenici essentially did was give cover to SIG and some of these other people who were trying to have these relationships, that trying to make sure there was enough money going into these places that the scientists and the researchers wouldn't flee to other parts of the world.
So, Domenici was the guy who really brought on the first program that we called the HEU to LEU deal, or sort of the bombs to plowshares, or some people call it megatons to megawatts.
And so this is really turning swords into plowshares. The swords were there, the big, big pile of highly enriched uranium and 38 tons of plutonium.
He helped to broker a deal with Russia on the sale of their uranium, which he proposed that the U.S. could use to power American nuclear power plants. His legislation turned dangerous, highly enriched uranium into low-enriched uranium, safe enough to be used in American reactors.
Today, as a result of that work, nuclear energy generates 20% of the electricity in this country, and half of that comes from Russian warheads because of that program that he helped piece together in the early 1990s. 1 in 10 houses in this country is lit with electricity generated from low-enriched uranium that used to be high-enriched uranium in Russian warheads.
In Russia. I was walking through a doorway in a hallway, and they said, there's a camera up there. It takes pictures of who goes in and out. I went up closer, and sure enough, what it said was, made in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in a Russian doorway to one of their laboratories.
I would say, to a large extent, the reason that we made it through the 1990s without anything really terrible happening in the Russian nuclear complex was, to a large extent, because Domenici's vision, his foresight, and then his ability to continue to work the legislative end to support these activities.
And we need Domenici or Domenici-like senators in the Senate of the United States and Russia, of course.
He made America safer, Russia safer, and the world safer.
From Russia to the Rio Grande, Domenici worked on issues affecting people worldwide and in New Mexico. And nothing is more important in New Mexico than water.
That's the lifeblood of the state. Everywhere you go in the state, water is the issue. More precious than oil or anything. The Spanish, when they were here, developed these irrigation systems, put ditches in, and they're still existing. They got mayordomos, people that take care of the site because they themselves maintain the system.
When you see these little ditches, takeoffs from the big rivers, be it the Rio Grande, be it the Chama, be it the whichever, and what had happened for all the years, a heavy storm would come and the water would come too fast and it would break the dam, and they would come to Washington to get help, and we would appropriate money to repair the acequias. Well, the first time we did that, we all clapped, except the next rainstorm that came. Most of those got flooded away again. So I called in some experts from the Corps and said, what is this all about? Why don't we fix them? And they said, well, we are. The law says all you can do is repair to the same extent and in the same manner as they existed before. So we were always repairing things to be destroyed. And so I passed a water bill. It says that the acequias of New Mexico, historic facilities, and that the United States government's responsibility to assist in repairing them is not bound, they are not bound by the law that applies to other water systems. And that meant that they could come in and repair them permanently with concrete.
In 1999, some environmental groups sued the Bureau of Reclamation, basically requiring that they give the silvery minnow adequate water. Based on that ruling, there was a potential that farmers would not have water for irrigation, our cities, including Albuquerque, Santa Fe, would not have adequate water to provide to its citizens. So the senator got involved.
When they made the silvery minnow endangered species, we were having a hell of a time with the feds, and he intervened and helped us a lot in telling those people, well, we can't take the water to the fish, let's bring the fish to the water, instead of wasting all this water, taking it down where the fish was.
So we moved the fish in channels and moved it way upstream. It didn't have to go through all that sand and get dissipated.
We didn't have to let all that water go down to the fish. They got hatcheries now and reproduction of the minnow,
And there's not been litigation since.
He could do the balancing act there where he didn't take all the water for the minnow and he didn't take all the water for the farmers. We'll never have another Pete. We'll never have another Pete.
George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States. Get up! Our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts.
We begin this year in this administration in the midst of an unprecedented crisis that calls for unprecedented action.
Greenspan came and told us, well, those are surpluses as far as the eye could see. So in the spring of 2001, we passed your last budget, real budget, was the one where we passed with, okay, we'll reduce the surplus by cutting taxes. And I'll never forget it, Senator. We were over, in fact, it was this building. It was the morning of September the 11th. And you had me working on a speech that you were going to give on the floor that day that said that we were going to box away the Social Security surplus. And I put that speech away for you, and
never gave it.
You never gave it. Yeah.
That was the first of the two buildings that got bombed.
And that was when the surplus that we had generated started to turn on us.
Yeah. Surplus turned to rocks.
The United States now understood just how dangerous the world could be. And with the nuclear test ban treaty in effect, Domenici set about finding a way to test our weapon systems without explosion. He did that and secured the ongoing mission of the laboratories in New Mexico.
The essence of stockpile stewardship was, now that we can't test the nuclear weapons anymore, but this country still relies on nuclear weapons for deterrence, how do we make sure they stay safe, secure, and reliable? Domenici, again, was one of the most important in Congress to help us develop and then be able to enact the legislation for stockpile stewardship.
The last bill we passed, it was a good bill for the development of all kinds of energy, including oil and natural gas.
Well, in 2005, which is a more partisan era, he decided there needed to be an energy bill. And he was the chairman of the committee, and Jeff Bingaman, the other senator from New Mexico, was the ranking Democrat. So instead of doing what majorities usually do, which is run over the minority, Pete set the whole Republican group down, the majority, and said, we're going to have a bipartisan bill. And that means if Senator Bingaman doesn't want to do it, we won't do it. And that's the way they went all the way through the process. And so that meant Pete didn't get to do some things he wanted to do, and Jeff didn't either. But in the end, they got a bill. And it was a very important bill, much more important than many people think, because it put our country on a long-term path toward cleaner energy. It began a nuclear renaissance, helped nuclear plants get back up off the ground. And it wouldn't have happened if Pete hadn't been good at working across the aisle.
Would you like me to take a briefcase for you?
The Urban Commission is going to advise the President and the Congress on the disposal of nuclear waste by the United States, recommendations and approaches to doing that.
He has been instrumental in pushing the nuclear industry, and the most critical part of the nuclear industry that was not able to get started was the back end of the fuel cycle. How to dispose of long-lived radioactive materials.
For 11 years, going on 12, we have been depositing transuranic waste in the deep salt mines of New Mexico. And these commissioners are in awe of the proposition that we already have a way to do it. And people just don't know it. And they're going to see how it works.
His ability to grasp technical issues is phenomenal. We can come in and give him a 20-minute discussion, and he can summarize that to us so quickly, and he knows what to do. Okay? And at the same time, the senator's got a knack for having great staff around him.
Although he left the Senate in 2008.
It makes reprocessing unnecessary.
That's correct.
Pete Domenici is still immersed in nuclear and budget issues and continues to serve the country.
Senator Domenici and I have co-chaired for the Bipartisan Policy Center, a debt reduction task force. Our charge was to show that a bipartisan group of citizens who had budget experience but came from different walks of life could put together a plan that would rein in the debt, that would avoid the debt crisis that we believe the United States is headed for if we do not change course. We did that.
I am here today telling you that this is not a partisan issue. It is an American issue. The debt is not a Republican debt or Democrat debt, it's an American debt. Unless we set out to try to fix it, obviously, we are giving up on the freedom that is ours, the innovation and opportunity that we pass on. Who knows where we'll be in 15 years or so if we let this problem fall right in front of us. Thank you all very much. It's great to be with you. I think I got things done for my state, my country, and maybe the world. You love the country enough to sacrifice for it. especially to preserve the things that you think are special about it. Right or wrong, I base this giving of myself on the fact that I gave myself for a country that I believe is the greatest country that mankind has ever put together.